What if the person you trusted most was the one planning your downfall? She gave everything, her love, her loyalty, her future, believing she was building a life with the right person. But behind closed doors, secrets were growing, lies were stacking, and betrayal was already in motion. The moment the truth is exposed, everything changes. The heartbreak is real, but so is her strength. Because instead of falling apart, she rises, stronger, smarter, and ready to take back everything that was almost stolen from her. This isn't just a story about betrayal.
This confidential information clearly
power,
shows Mr.
awakening,
Harrison's
and
involvement in the
unstoppable
illicit
revenge.
transactions.
The lesson? Trust your instincts. They see what your heart tries to ignore. Not everyone who stands beside you is on your side. And sometimes, losing someone is exactly how you find yourself again. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and support the channel. Your support is the motivation to bring more powerful stories like this in the future. Thanks for watching.
The ballroom was dim as my husband Damien approached the podium to deliver his speech at the Lexington Tower's grand opening gala. He flashed a practiced smile at 500 of New York's real estate titans and then cast a significant glance toward his pregnant lead architect in the front row. His father, a titan of industry himself, sat next to me. Our 13-year-old daughter was at our table, and a prominent council member who had just praised Damien in a magazine feature was chatting nearby. I remained seated, my phone feeling heavy in my hand, as a single realization echoed in my head. I was already aware. I knew everything, yet it still felt like a physical blow, stealing the air from my chest. He believed this subtle public acknowledgement of his new life would shatter me. He anticipated tears, a hasty retreat, and my quiet disappearance as he seamlessly integrated her into his world. He was mistaken, because what no one in that opulent ballroom knew, not him, not her, not of his partners, was that I had already forwarded a comprehensive dossier to a reporter at the New York Times, and before his speech on building an enduring legacy concluded, the city would learn about every secret deal he thought was buried in shell corporations. This is the tale of how a loyal wife became the architect of her husband's ruin. Let this be a lesson to all. Your grace is not a weakness. Your silence is not consent. And the instant you choose to reclaim the story is the instant your real power ignites. If you have ever been made to feel like a decorative afterthought by the one person who promised to build a future with you, this story is for you. If this retelling makes your pulse quicken, if it sparks a flame within you, if you feel a deep-seated sense of familiarity, then please do one thing for me this evening. Click that subscribe button. Not for my own sake, but for the next person who needs to discover this story when they feel utterly alone at 3 in the morning. Every subscription, every like, and every share guides this message to someone sitting in the darkness, questioning their own sanity. They are not insane, and your click could be the very signal that confirms it. Leave a comment and share where you are tuning in from and what you might have done in that glittering ballroom. We go through every single one. The ballroom was dim when my husband used his keynote address to unveil his pregnant mistress to the world of high finance. 500 people, my father-in-law, my 13-year-old daughter, a key investor, and I just sat there, my phone on my lap, thinking, I knew, and I was still completely blindsided. But let's go back to the very beginning, because the real betrayal wasn't that speech. It started a year earlier, on a Wednesday, with a single unusual charge from a bespoke furniture maker I was never supposed to see. To the outside world, Clara Hayes lived a life that was perfectly curated. A breathtaking penthouse on Park Avenue with panoramic views of the city. A husband, Damien, the celebrated mogul of a sprawling real estate empire. A 13-year-old daughter named Lily, who was already winning awards at her prestigious private school, and her own esteemed background as a former curator for the Met, now dedicated to philanthropic arts programs. It was a life of flawless composition, but from within, Clara had started noticing a hairline crack in the masterpiece. It began with small inconsistencies you dismiss because examining them too closely threatens to shatter the whole picture. Damien said he was stuck in a late-night zoning board meeting downtown, but the car service receipts showed a 2 a.m. drop-off in a residential Tribeca neighborhood. Damien would come home not smelling of blueprints and city grit, but of a rare sandalwood perfume sold at only one boutique near his lead architect's apartment. Damien's personal investment patterns suddenly shifted from their joint wealth advisor to a series of opaque offshore accounts she couldn't access. She convinced herself she was misinterpreting the signs. She told herself that 17 years of marriage had earned him a baseline of trust. She rationalized that a marriage required active faith, not constant scrutiny, and Damien was simply facing immense pressure with the firm's new global expansion. Then Lily said something that demolished her carefully constructed gallery of denial. They were having dinner, just the two of them, on a Saturday. Damien was supposedly at a critical investor dinner in Dubai. Lily was sketching a design for a school project when she glanced up, her face a mask of pure curiosity. She asked, "Mom, why does Isabella from Dad's architecture firm keep showing up on the building's visitor logs? The times are always really late, after 11 p.m. Clara maintained a calm expression, suggesting it was likely just intense work sessions for the new tower. But hours after Lily went to bed, Clara stood in her marble kitchen, gripping the cold stone island until her knuckles turned white. The water from the tap ran and ran. She didn't weep, she didn't phone a friend, she just stood there thinking, since when did I start accepting forgeries in my own home? On the first Tuesday of every month, the Lexington dynasty held court at a private, members-only club in Midtown, where Damien's father, a legendary property developer who had shaped the city's skyline, presided over the family. He was an imposing figure who spoke of nothing but acquisitions, leverage, and legacy. Damien's mother was a constant presence, a master of social maneuvering and brutal efficiency. After the financial briefings came the display of unity and power, and Damien would perform the role of the adoring husband flawlessly. He would place his hand on the small of Clara's back for a photograph, kiss her cheek, and whisper something like, "This woman is the entire foundation of my success." And Clara would smile, because that was her role in this elaborate production. Smile, be supportive, stay quiet, and project unwavering confidence. Let me tell you about the erosion of a partnership. The breaking point isn't when the fighting starts, it's when you realize you're no longer partners, you're just co-branding. It's when your husband's touch feels less like affection and more like he's repositioning you for a better public image. Pay attention to that instinct, not because you need to be suspicious, but because you are worthy of being truly cherished by the person who vowed to build a life with you. Clara's most trusted friend was a woman named Amelia, a sharp-witted investigative journalist as direct and incisive as Clara was poised and diplomatic. Amelia was the kind of friend who would meet for lunch, take one look at the strain around Clara's eyes and say, "All right, cut the feed. The serene society wife act is starting to buffer." They would share a tense laugh, but the observation would land with a thud in Clara's gut, its truthfulness undeniable. It was Amelia who uncovered the first tangible piece of evidence. Clara had mentioned the odd credit card charges, asking Amelia if she could discreetly look into the high-end appointment-only interior design studio. While looking into the company's ownership, Amelia uncovered something far more significant: a series of wire transfers from one of Damien's holding companies to a newly formed LLC. The LLC's sole asset was a multi-million-dollar penthouse condominium in Tribeca, registered under the name Nightingale Properties. Amelia sat in her bustling newsroom office overlooking Times Square and stared at the property deeds for a solid 20 minutes. Then she used her press credentials to pull the building's architectural filings from the city records, scrubbed her search history, and spent the next 2 days feeling like she was tracking a ghost. She tried to create a plausible, innocent explanation. Maybe it was a secret investment property. Maybe it was a quiet acquisition for a future project. Maybe Nightingale Properties was just a standard corporate name. But her intuition told her it was something else. It's a sense that good journalists develop, a profound certainty when the facts don't align with the narrative. On a Wednesday afternoon, over coffee in a quiet cafe, Amelia slid a folder across the table toward Clara. Clara examined the documents showing the property purchase. Her face went pale, but her hands remained perfectly still. She placed her cup down, took a deliberate breath, and said, "It's likely just a strategic acquisition. He's building our portfolio before the next market shift." Amelia leaned forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Clara, the LLC is registered to a P.O. box in Isabella Rossi's name, and Nightingale isn't just a corporate name. It's the theme of the nursery. I got a source to send me the interior designer's final proposal. They designed custom wallpaper for the baby's room. It's covered in nightingales, and the proposal includes a note from Damien thanking them for helping create the perfect sanctuary for his new son. A $90,000 charge on their health insurance statement for a maternal plus rider would have seemed odd. Alastair Finch would never overlook such a cost without explanation. Maybe it was time to stop rationalizing the small inconsistencies piling up around the man who was clearly running a parallel life. The quiet in their Beacon Hill brownstone felt heavy with secrets. Eleanor expertly diverted the conversation with her friend Maeve to their daughter Lily's upcoming science fair project. Maeve let her, understanding that friendship sometimes means admiring the finished experiment, and other times it means not asking about the failed trials. But later, with Lily asleep and the gas lamps of the old city glowing outside, Eleanor logged into their insurance portal. She didn't try to access Alistair's locked company files. His digital security was impenetrable. Instead, she navigated to the list of covered dependents. The unease in her stomach was a clinical symptom. It was just a clerical error, she told herself. There had to be a logical explanation. The pregnancy was making her paranoid. When an archivist finds a document that contradicts the known historical record, the first impulse is to verify its provenance. That isn't denial. It's professional rigor applied to emotional survival. Denial is ignoring the document. Survival is finding a different way to interpret it. And Eleanor had been reinterpreting things for so long, she'd forgotten the stark clarity of an undeniable fact. But the policy update was real. The dependent's name was real. And somewhere in a state-of-the-art lab in Cambridge, a woman Eleanor had never met was receiving premium care funded by her husband. Eleanor drifted through the next 2 weeks in a fog. She cataloged a newly acquired collection of 18th century letters, negotiated the digital rights for a historic manuscript, and helped Lily build a diorama of the human cell, all while the carefully preserved archive of her own life was degrading. The strain was immense. It was like trying to restore a fragile document while the ink was fading before her eyes. On a Friday evening, she made a decision that felt both disloyal and necessary. She called her cousin, who worked in IT security for a competing biotech firm. She lied, claiming she wanted to set up a surprise smart nursery for Alastair, a tribute to his work, his legacy. In reality, she needed to see the raw data of his life because the peer-reviewed version he presented to her felt increasingly like falsified research. Alastair was the celebrated CEO of Finch Biogenics, a company whose gene editing technology was poised to change modern medicine. Eleanor, a respected rare book specialist, had attended countless galas on his arm, but she had never once attempted to access his private research network. It felt like reading someone's sealed last will and testament. She was looking for schematics for the nursery project when she found it. A work order from his secure project management system, clearly not for general access, was saved in a folder deceptively titled Lab HVAC Retrofit. The line item read, AS BioCradle Protocol Activation. It was followed by a series of purchase orders from a Swiss medical suppliers for a proprietary atmospheric purifier and custom-built neonatal monitoring equipment, all destined for a luxury residence in the Seaport district. Eleanor felt a cold academic certainty, like finding a perfect, damning forgery. As she knew Alastair's company had recently promoted a brilliant geneticist to lead their flagship project, A quick search of the company's internal leadership directory confirmed the name, Dr. Anika Sharma. The final system test was scheduled for 11 a.m. the next day. Eleanor, sitting in her car in a coffee shop parking lot across the street, watched Alistair's sleek silver sedan disappear into the building's underground parking. Moments later, Dr. Sharma exited the lobby, a woman whose professional demeanor was as precise and polished as her research papers. In her hand was a biometric tablet linked to the building's systems, a device Eleanor recognized from Alistair's recent home tech upgrades, a $50,000 piece of proprietary tech held as casually as a clipboard. A wave of dizziness swept over her. Alistair emerged from the garage and met Annika with a brief, quiet exchange, placing his hand on the small of her back with an air of clinical possession as he led her back into the building. Eleanor forced herself to keep watching. The archivist in her observed the details, the context, the primary sources, while the wife inside her felt the spine of her own story break. She pulled out the latest 3D ultrasound printout of her own baby, wedged inside her day planner, and stared at the flickering image of new life as the world she had so carefully cataloged was irrevocably corrupted in the quiet of her car. She didn't drive back to their brownstone. She drove to the library, using her key to let herself into the silent, dark Special Collections vault. The lights of Cambridge, a glittering promise of a future that was no longer hers. She sat there for an hour, the soft hum of the archival climate control her only sound, staring at the empty research tables, the ultrasound photo cold against her palm. Finally, she called her brother, Marcus. "I found his off-site project," she said, her voice flat. "There's another woman." A beat of silence on the line. "Ellie, are you sure? It could be for a client, a confidential trial. You're pregnant. The stress is getting to you." "She's pregnant, Marcus." And he's installed a medical-grade clean room in her condo, like she's his new clinical trial. The easygoing venture capitalist tone vanished from Marcus's voice, replaced by a sharp anger. "Ellie, you authenticate historical documents for a living. You don't misread primary sources. The fact that he has you second-guessing your own judgment is the most dangerous variable in this whole equation." Eleanor ended the call. She went home, made tea, and kissed Alistair when he walked in the door just after 11 p.m., his lab coat carrying the sterile, antiseptic scent of a place that wasn't their home. The performance was seamless. That night, as his breathing fell into a steady rhythm beside her, she thought, is our whole marriage just a long-term investment he plans to divest? The next 2 weeks were the most isolating of Eleanor's life. She didn't hire an investigator. She didn't stage a confrontation. She sidestepped all the melodrama. In truth, betrayal was a quiet, meticulous process of data collection. It was the 2 a.m. search for legal precedent for division of intellectual property developed during a marriage that made her feel like a footnote in her own life. The stress made her miss the appointment for her glucose screening test. She harshly critiqued a junior archivist's cataloging entry over a minor citation error, then retreated to her office and rested her cheek against the cold, thick glass of the window to stop herself from crying. She almost told her mother during their weekly video call but couldn't face the questions, so she talked about the university's endowment instead. She accidentally sent a message intended for Marcus to a group chat for the library's annual gala. It simply said, "What's the expected delivery date?" A full minute of heart-stopping panic passed before she could follow up with, "So sorry, that was for the rare bookbinders, my mistake." 2 committee members replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Marcus sent a private text a moment later. "Whose delivery date, Ellie? Whose?" Eleanor texted back, "Assessing the new acquisition. We'll report on its value." And a dry, bitter sound escaped her lips. It was her older brother who knew the collection wasn't real. He came over to help her set up the new encrypted server for her personal research files that Alistair had been too busy to handle. Marcus never pushed. He was a VC, a man who showed support through solid business plans and funding rounds. He took one look at his sister, at the new weariness in her expression, and said, My network is your network. Before he left, he set a thick, plainly bound report on high asset divorce law on her antique writing desk, a quiet signal that said, "I'm here when you're ready to liquidate." It was Marcus who accelerated things. He knew someone, a woman named Catherine Blair, a forensic accountant legendary for discreetly auditing the finances of Boston's biotech elite. Marcus arranged the meeting, telling Eleanor he was taking her to lunch to discuss creating a trust for Lily. When they walked into the quiet restaurant, and Catherine was already waiting at a secluded table with a tablet and a slim folder, Eleanor shot her brother a weary glance. "This isn't about the trust." "No," Marcus said. "It's about risk management. Sit." Marcus pushed his tablet across the polished mahogany of the conference room table. On the screen was a property title. "Listen," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "Maybe he has a legitimate reason for a private real estate holding company. But legitimate reasons rarely involve a $3 million waterfront condo that you've never heard of." Eleanor stared at the address, feeling the air tighten in her chest. "I don't want to be the kind of wife who runs due diligence on her own husband." Marcus tapped the screen, displaying a series of wire transfers. "You're an archivist, Ellie," he said softly. "You spend your entire life separating fact from fiction, model. You're just validating the biggest real estate deal of your life." "That's exactly right," Leo confirmed from across the coffee shop table, his tone level and sharp. "I'm not here to confirm what you're afraid of. I'm here to give you the data. There's a world of difference." Lena looked at her brother, his expression a tight mask of focus. "Fine," she whispered. "Uncover everything." Leo's hands flew across his laptop. "The full portfolio will be in your inbox before the sun comes up." He stopped typing. "And listen, if this turns out to be nothing, just some stress-induced fantasy, I'll write off the entire cost of the forensic accounting. No questions asked. It was not a fantasy." By morning, Leo had delivered a password-protected dossier. It was the architectural blueprint of a profound betrayal. Redacted transaction logs revealed monthly payments to a boutique concierge maternity practice, a different one from Lena's. There was a signed lease for a penthouse condo in Lincoln Park, held by a Shell LLC. And then, the final exhibit that turned Lena's blood to ice, a forwarded email from a mutual acquaintance with a link. It was a baby registry from a high-end Chicago boutique with the name Ava Thorne at the top and a due date 3 months ahead of Lena's. The registry's welcome message was a single sickening line, welcoming baby boy from Marcus and Ava. Ava Thorne was the brilliant new star architect at his firm. He wasn't just developing a new property, he was developing a new family. She got up, texted a single coded "portfolio received" to Leo, and walked into her serene home office in their Gold Coast apartment. This was the one space in the world that was entirely her own design. It was long after 2 a.m., and she gazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the blinking constellation of lights across the city. She sank into her leather Eames chair, the place where she'd spent countless hours over the past decade, and she let out a scream that made no sound. It was a violent internal collapse that demolished the life she had so meticulously curated. A moment later, her poise returned, cold and sharp. She tapped Chloe's contact. "I need you," she said, her voice thin as spun glass. "I'm already on my way," Chloe replied instantly. She didn't ask why, she simply came. The weeks that followed, leading up to the annual Chicago Architecture Foundation Gala, were a haze of detached, methodical precision. She proofread historical survey reports, finalized grant applications, and sent Leo brief, one-word updates. The plan was to confront Marcus at the gala. She would be flawless. She would present her findings, demand an equitable division of their shared assets, and shield her child from the ensuing demolition. She had a blueprint. The blueprint was her defense against the cutthroat world of Chicago's real estate magnates. The blueprint was a complete and utter fabrication. The evening of the Architecture Foundation Gala, Lena was ready by 5 o'clock in their Gold Coast penthouse, a vision in an emerald velvet gown that draped flawlessly over her 7-month pregnancy. It was Marcus's big night, and hers too. She had curated every detail of their existence, from the abstract art on the walls to the list of investors invited to this very event. She had even co-chaired the committee for the foundation's Young Preservationist grant. 22 rising stars would be celebrated. Marcus was a shoo-in for Developer of the Year. He was all smooth charm and unwavering eye contact, a stark contrast to the distant man he'd been for months. His hand rested on the small of her back, a warm, proprietary weight. He told her she was magnificent, his inspiration, 3 times before their town car even pulled up. He told her best friend Chloe that she looked formidable and clasped her brother Leo's hand with the firm grip of a man closing a 9-figure deal. The whole act was so perfect, so utterly persuasive, that Lena almost allowed the frozen knot in her stomach to loosen. Almost. She noticed him check a second, unfamiliar designer watch twice during the cocktail hour. She saw him duck out onto the terrace for a call, and when he came back inside, his face was flushed with a peculiar, victorious energy. It wasn't stage fright, it was triumph. The look of a developer who just got the city council's final approval. The awards presentation started. The foundation president's voice echoed through the vast ballroom, a polished narrative of innovation, community, and skyline-defining vision. Polite applause filled the room. Then they announced Marcus's name. He stood, kissed her cheek, and moved toward the stage. He accepted the award, a stunning bronze miniature of the Tribune Tower she had helped select. He commanded the audience. Lena's chest constricted with a bitter, twisted pride. He was about to thank her, his accomplished wife, his partner in all things. But his acceptance speech, broadcast on the huge screens on either side of the stage, veered into uncharted territory. True innovation is about building a legacy, Marcus stated, his voice ringing with rehearsed conviction. And I've recently broken ground on my most important project yet. I've met someone, her name is Ava, and she is giving me the incredible gift of a son. He walked to the front of the stage and extended his hand. From a table near the stage, Ava Thorne, his star architect, stood up and stepped into the spotlight. Her liquid silver gown hugged a pregnancy just as visible as Lena's, and her gaze was fixed on him with pure adoration. Marcus wrapped an arm around her waist and addressed the stunned silence of Chicago's elite. I realize the timing is unorthodox, he declared, but my life's work has been about transparency in design. I trust you'll all welcome us as we embark on this new venture together. The silence that followed was a heavy, suffocating thing, stealing the very oxygen from the air. A waiter dropped a tray of champagne glasses, the sound shattering the quiet like a rifle shot against the marble floors. Her brother, Leo, shoved his chair back with a loud, furious scrape. The foundation president's face was a pale, slack-jawed caricature of shock. Her best friend Chloe's hand shot to her mouth, her eyes burning with a chilling rage, and Lena, 7 months pregnant, seated at the main table of honor, stared at the man on stage, her husband, with his arm wrapped around another pregnant woman, and could only think, which calculation did I get wrong? She didn't yell. She didn't weep or throw her crystal water goblet. She remained perfectly motionless, a stillness born not of grace, but of the absolute vacuum at the center of a tornado. The room started to warp, the elegant uplighting smearing into surreal streaks of light, her own heartbeat a deafening drum against her ribs. One terrifyingly lucid thought sliced through the chaos. I am about to go into labor in the middle of the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Tribune will have the exclusive by dawn. Transparency in design, that was the mantra he'd repeated for months while building a secret life and systematically demolishing theirs. The hypocrisy was so thick she felt like she could choke on it. Chloe's fingers dug into Lena's arm beneath the table. "We are leaving, right now," she hissed, her voice a weapon. But Lena was frozen, watching her entire world get publicly condemned. Then, something inside her didn't shatter. It calcified. A cold, diamond-hard strength. She stood, her spine straight and rigid. She turned toward the grand exit, her head held high, and she never once looked back. "Lena, let's be radically honest with our foundations," Marcus called from the stage, his voice booming through the speakers, the master developer to the very end. Leo was already by the door, pulling it open. His voice was a low growl, thick with a promise that was anything but empty. "You have 5 seconds to get your hands off my wife before I create a scene that'll be front-page news on Crane's Chicago Business tomorrow. You don't yell. You don't break down. You never let a predator see the satisfaction of your pain. You just breathe. You pivot and you exit. The whole world can burn down after you are clear of the flames." They reached Leo's truck, parked in the museum's loading dock. Lena was a statue of composure as they navigated the backstage labyrinth, down concrete service stairs, past a gallery of shocked, murmuring onlookers. But the moment the battered truck door creaked shut, she broke, gasping for air as the fortress of her control finally crumbled. Leo drove as Lena folded herself into a ball in the passenger seat, a 7 months pregnant architectural historian weeping in a beat-up pickup truck on the most pivotal night of her professional life. That was the picture that would be seared into her memory. Not the look on Ava's face, not the cold fury in Marcus's eyes. Only the blur of city lights through a rain of tears and the steady sight of her brother's hand on the gear shift. Eleanor spent the night in the spare bedroom of her brother Ben's small apartment in the Mission District. Ben, a paramedic, took the worn-out sofa, refusing to leave her alone. He came in at dawn with 2 cups of tea, a faded Stanford hoodie, and a laptop. He sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Okay, we map a new strategy, because that's what we do when some tech mogul tries to delete our entire existence." Eleanor nodded, feeling hollow. She felt like a corrupted hard drive, the data still present, but the operating system completely fried. But her curator's mind was already starting to catalog. She could draft a new plan. She had cloud backups of everything. She had a digital record of every asset, every account. She would hire the most aggressive litigator in Silicon Valley, and she would design a new life for herself and her daughter. She thought the system crash was over. She was profoundly mistaken. 2 days after the museum gala, Eleanor took a rideshare to their Pacific Heights mansion to pack a bag. She walked up the pristine streets she adored, up the limestone steps she had helped design, and held her key fob up to the smart lock. The light stayed red. Access denied. The lock had been recoded. She peered through the floor-to-ceiling glass of her own front window and saw, hanging in the entryway where her favorite abstract sculpture should be, a hideous piece of algorithm-generated art she despised. A piece she knew Chloe, the UX designer, had praised at a tech conference. He had already changed the codes. Arthur had already moved his pregnant mistress into the modern home Eleanor had spent 3 years curating. When Eleanor called, he answered instantly, his voice as cool and detached as if he were discussing a server outage. "Eleanor, my counsel advised a protocol update to secure the primary residence. You vacated the premises. The system logs confirm your exit." "Vacated the premises? I emailed you the final non-toxic specifications for our daughter's nursery the same day you were on a yacht with your girlfriend in Belize, Arthur. It was on our shared server. I believe it's best if all future communications are routed through our attorneys." The call ended. Eleanor stood on the sidewalk of her own street, looking up at the home where she had sourced the specific organic paint for their daughter's room, where the 3D ultrasound images were on the smart fridge's display, where every book, every piece of art, every memory was hers. Her entire world was in that house, and he had just revoked her user permissions. If you are ever forced out of your home, even for a single night, document everything. Send a time-stamped, encrypted email to your lawyer declaring that you are leaving under duress and have no intention of relinquishing your residence. Understand your legal rights before a crisis hits, because the person you built a life with can use the very architecture of that life to demolish yours. The next blow landed 2 days later. Eleanor tried to pay an art restoration specialist from her business account. The corporate card was declined. she tried to log into their joint crypto portfolio. Authorization failed. Please contact the administrator. She called their wealth manager, a man they cycled with in Marin every Sunday. His voice was tense. Eleanor, Mr. Thorne has migrated all marital assets into a new single-key cryptographic trust. Eleanor sat in her brother's beat-up car, parked overlooking the bay, and checked her personal bank account. $523. A 12-year partnership. A husband with a tech empire worth billions. And she was left with $523. She sent Ben a simple text. He wiped it, all of it. His response was immediate. Don't move, I'm on my way. In her brother Ben's cluttered apartment, surrounded by the smell of instant coffee and a protective fury that was the only warmth she felt, they began to strategize. Arthur had already retained Diana Walsh, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Silicon Valley, a woman famous for her scorched earth tactics. Then the character assassination began. Using his influence on tech blogs and his vast network of venture capitalists, a story began to circulate through the Valley's elite. Eleanor Thorne was a brilliant art curator, but emotionally unstable. The pressure of her latest exhibition, combined with the hormones of her pregnancy, had apparently triggered a serious mental health crisis. Arthur was portrayed as the devoted, suffering husband, trying his best to support her through a difficult period. A popular tech gossip site ran a thinly veiled item about the personal struggles of creative professionals, never using Eleanor's name, but everyone in the industry knew. The ultimate humiliation came from Ben. He came home after a 48-hour shift, dropped his paramedic bag by the door, and placed $5,000 in worn bills on the table. "It's all my savings," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Eleanor just shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "Ben, I can't take your money." "It's not a loan," he said, his paramedic's hand covering hers. "It's what we do. You take it." He didn't have to say more. Anyone who mattered in their world had heard the whispers. A prominent venture capitalist who sat on the museum board with Arthur stopped Eleanor in a cafe a few days later. "People are concerned, Eleanor," she said, her voice a practiced mix of sympathy and judgment. "I don't listen to the chatter, you know that, but you should be aware of the narrative." The official assault arrived on a foggy Tuesday. Arthur had filed a petition for sole custody of their unborn daughter, citing Eleanor's increasingly erratic behavior and documented emotional instability. After all, she was unemployed and living in her brother's spare room in a fourth-floor walk-up. The legal filings depicted her as a woman on the verge of a total collapse, while a stable, loving father fought to protect his child. Eleanor finally broke that night. It wasn't a dramatic, screaming failure. She broke the way most systems do, with a silent, internal cascade of errors, alone in the dark. Eleanor stood on the narrow fire escape of her brother's building, 20 floors above the glittering lights of the financial district. It was 2 a.m. Below, the city hummed with a life that felt completely alien. A cold, sharp thought cut through her despair. What if Arthur was right? What if she was the one who was malfunctioning? Maybe their daughter was better off with a father who could provide everything, not a mother sleeping on a borrowed mattress. The thought was a strange, insidious virus, a surrender she nearly executed. And then she felt a push. A tiny, determined foot pressed hard against her ribs, a small life initiating its own reboot sequence. She slid the window open and went back inside. Her daughter, a new collection to build around, was already there, already counting on her. Eleanor stood in the quiet of her kitchen, the San Francisco city lights casting long shadows across the concrete floor, and she came to a decision. There was no theatrical meltdown, no shouted declaration to the empty room. It was a silent, steely resolution from a woman who had lost everything but the new life she was carrying. She would launch a counteroffensive. Diana Walsh's law firm occupied the top floor of a sleek skyscraper overlooking the bay, a modern spear of glass and steel. The name on the door was simply Walsh Litigation, and the atmosphere inside smelled of expensive espresso and calculated aggression. On Diana's expansive desk, a minimalist sculpture of a shark was inscribed with a single word: dominate. Behind her, a framed piece of calligraphy stated, "The most effective defense is a catastrophic offense." Diana, known in legal circles as the Shark, was in her early 50s, a whip-smart woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that saw everything. She exuded the controlled intensity of someone who ran on black coffee and an unshakable belief in her own superiority. She had built a formidable reputation dismantling the empires of Silicon Valley's most powerful men on behalf of their wives. Eleanor sat before her, a tablet displaying the evidence she'd painstakingly compiled from their financial records. The images showed a string of charges to a private art dealer, a secret cloud storage account, and the purchase of a luxury penthouse under an opaque shell corporation. Diana swiped through the files, her neutral expression slowly hardening into one of cold, focused rage. When she finished, she set the tablet down, leaned across the titanium desk, and met Eleanor's gaze. "My dear," she said, her voice a polished, dangerous weapon, "we will not be asking for a fair severance package. We are going to execute a hostile takeover of his entire life." For the first time in weeks, a ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. Diana was a cyber attack in a bespoke suit. Within a week, Diana filed a motion requesting an emergency injunction, temporary sole use of their Pacific Heights mansion for Eleanor, and an immediate legal freeze on all digital and financial assets held by Arthur Thorne, both personally and through his tech corporation. The filing included the damning art receipts, proof of crypto transfers to Chloe, and a sworn affidavit from Eleanor detailing the cold digital trail that had unraveled the affair. On a crisp autumn morning, the judge granted everything. Eleanor used her phone to unlock her home for the first time since that terrible night. The art curator's portfolio case, usually propped by the door, was gone. Marcus's designer suits were still in the closet, but the penthouse felt hollow and foreign, its massive, elegant windows reflecting a skyline that no longer felt like hers. Lena walked directly to the nursery. The vintage copy of Goodnight Moon, the one she read to her unborn baby every single night, was sitting on the rocking chair just where she'd left it. She gripped the book, its familiar, worn edges a small anchor, and just stood there, inhaling the smell of fresh paint and quiet hope, the smell of everything she was now fighting to save. A shift was happening. She had a lawyer. She had a mountain of financial evidence. She had a blueprint. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Lena felt a tiny, flickering spark of an emotion she thought had been permanently destroyed: optimism. And that was precisely when the counterattack was launched. Marcus's attorney, Stephen Davies, filed a motion that hit with the force of a wrecking ball. The accusation was stunning in its audacity. Lena Miller, it claimed, was guilty of misappropriating marital assets, attempting to embezzle funds from their shared accounts to secretly fund a historical preservation project, in a conspiracy with her colleague and alleged lover, Daniel. Davies provided carefully curated email threads, bank statements showing transfers to a nonprofit's account, and security stills of Lena meeting Daniel at his office after hours, weaving it all into a convincing story of betrayal. The digital ledger was factually correct, but the narrative it spun was a calculated lie. Every single transfer had been earmarked for a stealth acquisition Marcus himself had championed for months. But stripped of that vital context, the coded payments and encrypted folders painted a vivid picture of deceit. The judge, unconvinced by either side, issued a temporary injunction on the company's main operating account and their shared portfolio, setting a formal hearing date. Amelia smashed her fist on the polished oak of her lawyer's conference table. Those funds were for our Project Nightingale acquisition. He approved every wire. "I know," her lawyer Diana sighed, rubbing her temples. "We know. The issue is proving it. This injunction buys Marcus the time he needs to starve us out." That evening, a message from Marcus pinged on her phone. His tone was breezy and infuriating, the one he always used when he was sure he had already won. Amelia, just sign the offer. Let's not make this ugly. $5 million for your equity, and we'll figure out a co-parenting plan. It's what's best for everyone, especially with the baby coming. $5 million for the tech empire she coded into existence in their garage, for the decade of her life she'd invested in their shared vision, for her silence. The amount wouldn't even cover the capital gains tax on their San Francisco penthouse. Amelia sat at their huge, empty dining table that night, the settlement offer glowing on her laptop as a cursor pulsed on the digital signature line. The penthouse was eerily silent. She felt the gentle, reassuring flutter of her son turning inside her. Outside, the fog rolled in over the Golden Gate Bridge, blanketing the city in a cold, gray mist. She considered just clicking the mouse. She considered how simple it would be to make the fighting stop. She thought about the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had taken root in her soul and how easy it would be to take the money and just vanish. Her sister Chloe appeared in the doorway, having let herself in with a key. "Don't even think about it," Chloe said, her voice a low warning. "Chloe, I am so tired of this." "I know, but you didn't endure a public smear campaign and a financial ambush just to sell your life's work for a rounding error. Step away from the laptop." Amelia let the screen go dark. Her older brother David came in behind Chloe, carrying a bag of her favorite sourdough from a bakery in the Mission. He sat beside her, a quiet, reassuring presence. "Remember your senior year at Stanford?" he asked gently. "When that professor accused you of plagiarizing your final project because your code was too elegant for a student?" A small, tired smile touched Amelia's lips. "I wrote a program to analyze the syntax of my code against the entire university database and proved it had a 100% unique authorial signature." "That's right," David said, meeting her eyes. "Because you don't back down from a bully. You build a better weapon. He's just trying to make you forget you have an entire arsenal." The legal battle to lift the injunction took a grueling month. A month of being unable to make payroll or pay their server hosts. A month of Marcus parading Isabella around at industry functions, projecting an image of untouchable success. A month of poison-tipped rumors spreading through the tight-knit circles of Silicon Valley. But her lawyer, Diana, was a master strategist. Her brother David presented a forensic analysis of the company's servers, which included recovered chat logs where Marcus called the acquisition a guaranteed 10-bagger. David's testimony was so airtight, so reinforced with metadata and immutable logs, that Marcus's legal team had no questions for cross-examination. The judge not only restored Amelia's full control of the corporate accounts, but delivered a sharp reprimand to the opposing counsel for bringing such a flimsy, malicious case to court. Diana called her from the courthouse steps, her voice crackling with victory. "We're back online, Amelia, and he just learned we don't scare easy." Amelia exhaled a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 30 days. The divorce would now proceed on her terms. Diana was confident they could secure the penthouse, a controlling interest in the company, and a rock-solid custody agreement. For the first time, Amelia let herself imagine a future where she would not just survive, but win. She should have realized it would never be that simple. Isabella's name flashed on her screen on a Thursday night, calling from a blocked number. Amelia's first instinct was to decline the call. "Miss Vance, it's Isabella. I am begging you, please just give me 1 minute." Amelia's grip on her phone tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to hang up, that nothing good could come from a conversation with the woman who would help orchestrate her life's demolition. But she recognized something in Isabella's voice, a tremor, a crack in the polished facade that Amelia had heard in her own voice for weeks. "I have to see you," Isabella pleaded. "It has to be in person. It's about Marcus, and it's about my baby." They met in a small, dimly lit cafe in the Mission District, a place neither of them would ever frequent. Isabella was already there, huddled in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked nothing like the ambitious, polished analyst from the company's press photos. She looked younger, and she looked absolutely terrified. The slight curve of her own pregnancy was now apparent under her jacket. Amelia slid into the booth across from her. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the hiss of the espresso machine. Amelia was the one who spoke first. "Why did you call me?" Isabella pushed a small, plain thumb drive across the scarred wooden table. Her fingers trembled. "He swore your life together was just for show," Isabel typed, the words appearing on the encrypted chat window. "He described you as driven, detached, that you two were more business partners than husband and wife. He painted this picture of profound loneliness, that he stayed for the sake of your company's image. And I bought every word. He has this way of making you feel like you're the only one who truly understands him, and at 31, I wanted that fairy tale. He made me believe I was his future." She paused, the blinking cursor a digital heartbeat. "Then last week, he told me that if I didn't sign a backdated document taking responsibility for a series of unauthorized stock trades, he would make sure my career was over. He said his legal team would prove I was a rogue employee who abused my access to confidential information." In that moment, Clara saw it all clearly. He doesn't care about either of us. We are just assets to be leveraged. The cold reality of it hung in the air of her silent, sterile office. Two women connected only by a secure server, bound by the calculated malevolence of one man. Back in her own apartment, Clara stared at the files Isabel had sent. "What is all this?" she asked into her headset. "Everything," Isabel's voice replied, a thin digital thread. "The brokerage accounts he had me open, the holding companies registered to my address, the untraceable crypto transfers. He used my credentials to access your firm's preclinical data, then shorted a competitor's stock right before you announced your breakthrough. He framed me as the architect of his entire scheme. I'm listed as the sole director on shell companies I didn't even know existed. He has entangled me in this just as thoroughly as he has you, and I was completely blind to it." Clara clicked through the layers of files. This wasn't just a handful of illegal trades. It was the blueprint for financial ruin. Encrypted logs of data breaches, offshore transfer receipts, keys to anonymous digital wallets. The sheer audacity of Marcus's betrayal was breathtaking. For 18 months, he had been methodically stealing her company's most sensitive research, funneling proprietary formulas through ghost servers and shell corporations. He was engineering an exit so complete it wasn't just a divorce, it was the obliteration of her life's work. Her own brother Daniel had noticed the network vulnerabilities, but Isabel had just handed her the key to the entire conspiracy. 97% of their core intellectual property already mirrored on a server belonging to a rival firm he was secretly funding. Clara stared at the screen, her voice barely a whisper. "So, our life, this baby, it was all just a cover for corporate espionage?" Isabel's response flashed on the screen, cold and stark. "For both of us." An empty, sterile silence hummed across the encrypted channel. Clara closed her laptop. She pictured Isabel, the brilliant analyst Marcus had praised so highly, and no longer saw an adversary, but another professional life caught in the gears of his ruthless ambition. It turned out the strongest alliances are sometimes forged in the fires of mutual betrayal. The other woman isn't always the enemy. Sometimes she is just the first casualty. You don't have to become friends. You don't have to forgive. But when someone hands you the truth as a weapon, you take it. "Thank you," Clara typed, the two hardest words she had ever written. They made no further pact. There was no moment of shared solidarity. But in that single encrypted data transfer, two women played by the same man formed an unspoken pact. He would not win. When Clara showed the files to Eleanor, her lawyer stared at the monitor for 3 solid minutes, her expression hardening as she absorbed the scale of the theft. Finally, she looked at Clara. "He didn't just cheat on you, Clara. He orchestrated a multi-million-dollar securities fraud scheme. He's been planning to bankrupt your company for over a year, all while telling you he was your biggest supporter." Clara simply gave a slow, deliberate nod, the capacity for tears having left her days ago. She was well past grief and into the cold realm of strategy. "So where do we go from here?" Eleanor's posture straightened. "We proceed exactly as planned. We file the divorce petition. But now," she said, a sharp, icy smile touching her lips, "we also make this a case that will set a precedent. And we are going to build this case with such precision that by the time we are done, no one will ever question what kind of man Marcus Thorne truly is. There was one last piece." On a hunch, Clara had Owen look into the Thorne family's business history, searching for a similar playbook. He found something that changed the entire game. He called Clara on a Thursday afternoon. "You might want to sit down for this." "I'm sitting, Owen. What is it?" "Your father-in-law, the legendary William Thorne. 30 years ago, he was part of a hostile takeover of a rival firm. An affair with a junior analyst named Sophia. She uncovered evidence of his insider trading. It resulted in a massive payout to make her disappear. A son born in 1991. William buried the payment in the acquisition's expense reports." Clara closed her eyes as a sick wave of recognition washed over her. Of course, the blueprint was generational. "And here's the kicker," Owen continued. "Marcus found out about it when he was 19. He confronted his father, and William told him that a man does what is necessary to protect his legacy. That was the lesson. That was the code William Thorne passed down to his son. That loyalty is a liability. That public perception is the only thing that's real. That a partner is just another variable to be managed, not an equal to be honored." Clara held on to that knowledge long after the call ended. She had no interest in destroying an old man with his past sins, but she finally understood, with a chilling and absolute clarity, where Marcus had learned to build such perfect, hollow worlds. He wasn't born a monster, he was meticulously crafted. The autumn air in Seattle was crisp and unforgiving. The wind off the Puget Sound carried a damp chill. The afternoon sun cast long, hard shadows off the glass towers, and the city hummed with the relentless energy of tech and capital. The annual Tech Innovation Summit was set to begin, a city-wide celebration of digital and economic power, the same way Marcus had performed his role as a husband, with flawless presentation and an utterly empty heart. Clara stood at the head of a large table in their condo's home office, a room they had converted into a command center. Eleanor's legal motions were in a neat, menacing stack. Owen's forensic network charts glowed on a massive screen, and Daniel, her brother, had covered a glass wall in a complex web mapping Marcus's data theft, circling key server breaches with a red marker like a general planning a siege. "All right, everyone," Daniel said, tapping the glass. "Tonight is the summit's opening keynote. Marcus is hosting a private reception for his fund's investors and the board members in the penthouse suite. He's calling it a celebration of our shared success." Her father, a retired research scientist, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his arms crossed tightly. "And for reasons that escape me, Clara is still planning to attend." Clara looked up from the affidavits she was signing. He sent the invitation as a joint announcement from both of us to his entire board. If I am a no-show, he gets to control the story that I am emotionally unwell and compromised by the pregnancy. Eleanor, joining via video call, nodded firmly. She is 100% correct, and honestly, this is our best possible stage. Marcus is overconfident. He assumes our initial filing has put Clara on the defensive. He has no idea Isabel has come forward. He has no idea we have copies of the stolen data logs from his offshore server. He will be completely blindsided. Daniel's face was strained with concern. "So you're going to detonate a bomb at the launch of his new fund? This is the biggest night of his career." Clara shook her head. "The most important reporters from the financial press are on their way right now, Daniel. I made sure of it. They think they are coming for an exclusive on his next big investment. What they are going to get, she said, letting the words hang in the air, is a much bigger story. It was a perfectly timed counteroffensive. The opulent penthouse suite of the hotel felt almost normal for a few minutes. Almost. Clara sent a text from her phone. "Owen, is everything in place?" Owen's reply was instant and definitive. The trading records proving the fraud, cross-verified. Isabel's sworn video deposition, digitally time-stamped and secured. The complete, unredacted financial records from the hidden shell corporations fully restored. And the medical report. The medical report. Amelia had been trying to force it from her mind. After Isabella's frantic confession, David had hired a private investigator to quietly verify the claims. The encrypted report had arrived in her inbox that morning. Marcus Thorne, the venture capital visionary and proud expectant father, was sterile. A bout of mumps in his late teens had left him completely unable to father children. The man who had publicly torched his marriage for this new family, this proof of his virility, had built it all on a foundation of sand. Isabella had never been pregnant with his child. Amelia had stared at the document for 5 straight minutes before the chilling reality sank in. Then she had set her phone down and let out a single harsh laugh. It wasn't a sound of joy, but the kind of raw, splintered noise that erupts when the sheer cosmic irony of a situation becomes too massive to bear. He wagered $1 billion company on a fantasy, she texted David, and now David had texted back, "We're about to present him with the bill." Amelia spent the next 2 days in a state of hyper-focused calm, preparing. She rehearsed her opening statement until her voice was a cool, detached instrument. She committed the account numbers, transaction IDs, and wire transfer dates to memory. Her brother David stopped by for a final systems check. "I'm patched into the convention center's network from an off-site server," he explained, holding up a tablet. "The moment you give the signal, the keynote presentation on the main screen will be replaced by our feed." Amelia nodded. "And that reporter from Wired, Jessica Fung," David continued, "she's been investigating Marcus's predatory business practices for 6 months. She believes she's meeting an anonymous source tonight for a quiet chat and a free dinner. It's purely a coincidence that her press pass puts her in the front row." A thin, cold smile touched Amelia's lips. "You have a talent for coincidences, David. Sis, I'm the best there is." Her father, a retired civil engineer, came into the room holding a small, encrypted device. "I'll be monitoring their security and network channels from the car downstairs." "You don't need to be there, Dad," Amelia said. Her father gave her the same steady, unwavering look he had since she was a girl, since she was 13 and had accidentally crashed her school's server, and he had calmly helped her fix it without a hint of panic in his voice. He said simply, "Yes, I do." On the evening of the Tech Innovators Summit, Amelia stood before the panoramic window of her penthouse, looking out at the glittering expanse of San Francisco. She was wearing a sleek, powerful maternity dress in a deep charcoal gray. No jewelry. Her expression was a mask of placid control. She examined the woman in the reflection for a long, silent moment. The woman who had discovered the hidden ledger late one night was gone. That woman had been shattered and betrayed. This woman was exhausted and had lost a future she would have done anything to protect. But she was not broken. She picked up her tablet. The screen displayed 3 folders: the ledger, the lies, the legacy. She tapped each one, confirming they were ready. She walked to the front door. Her brother was waiting on the secure line. "David, is the system ready for launch?" she asked, using their agreed-upon phrase. Her brother's voice was calm and clear. "I'm watching the countdown. Call me when the deployment is complete. I'll be there in 10. She took a slow, deep breath. "Hey, David, am I really going to do this?" Amelia could almost see him on the other end, this brilliant young man who had put his own startup on hold, spending countless nights in a server room, helping her piece the truth back together. "Yeah, Ames," he said softly, "you're about to be brilliant." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she actually believed him. The Sterling family's triplex overlooking Central Park was a testament to inherited power and modern austerity. It was a world of polished marble and stark white walls, punctuated by museum-quality art and a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. It functioned more like a private gallery than a home, a design choice Richard Sterling had always insisted upon. Olivia stepped out of the private elevator precisely at 8 p.m. The hum of the city below was a distant murmur, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm in her chest. She clutched her small evening bag, the insurance policy rider tucked inside, and walked toward the sound of muted conversation. Richard Sterling met her at the archway to the Grand Salon, the picture of effortless charm in a tailored Brioni suit, his smile as flawless and cold as the sculptures surrounding them. He looked at her as if she were a prized acquisition, not the woman whose trust he had systematically betrayed. "Olivia," he murmured, his voice a low, confident purr. "Darling, I was wondering where you were." She glided past him, her eyes scanning the room. The air was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. The city's financial elite were all there. Arthur Sterling, Richard's imperious father, and the firm's founder, a pair of hedge fund managers from London, the lead counsel for Sterling Capital, and Sophie standing near a priceless Rothko, her hand resting instinctively on the slight curve of her 5-month pregnancy. Her expression was a masterclass in serenity, a placid surface she'd spent a decade perfecting for occasions just like this. Olivia's eyes met her sister's, Jessica's, for a brief, electric moment across the crowded room. Jessica gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the confirmation she needed. Her sister was there, posing as a freelance photographer for a high-end lifestyle magazine, an identity so trivial Richard had never bothered to ask her name. His own ego was always his greatest vulnerability. The charity auction began. A series of digital art pieces flickered across a massive screen. Richard Sterling, her husband, took the stage and delivered a smooth, compelling speech about market foresight, philanthropic responsibility, and the future of global finance in New York City. Olivia watched his father, Arthur, a legend on Wall Street, tap impatiently at the face of his 6-figure Patek Philippe. The chatter around her was a cacophony of portfolio diversification, capital gains, and emerging markets. No one whispered the word mistress. No one spoke of the separation papers he'd had delivered to her that morning. The single greatest risk in the entire room was holding a microphone, and the crowd was too busy being captivated by his performance. Midway through his address, Richard smiled warmly. "I want to thank you all for your incredible generosity," he said, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "This last year has been about growth on all fronts. I've had to reassess some personal valuations, but my guiding philosophy has always been complete and total transparency. I see tonight as the launch of version 2.0. He paused, a master of the dramatic beat. "I asked Clara to be here because it's time to strengthen our primary partnership. For the future of this family, for the future of Ether AI, for the future of this industry." He finished to a roar of applause, giving Clara a look that was a perfect simulation of remorse. Clara let the sound fade for 3 seconds. Then she walked onto the stage. A current of confusion and anticipation shot through the room. "Julian believes in new versions," she said, her voice amplified, crisp and unwavering throughout the hall. "So do I. And I believe the best way to launch one is with a public audit." She glanced at the enormous LED screen behind the stage. Then she uttered a single name, Marcus. Instantly, the Ether AI logo was replaced by a dark, sleek interface titled Project Chimera. "This interface is running a live query on a secure, mirrored copy of Ether AI's internal servers," she announced. "Here, you will see the complete transaction ledger for a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, holding just over $22 million. Funds that were siphoned from our seed funding under the guise of data acquisition costs over the last 2 fiscal years." The auditorium fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Julian's smile didn't fall. It seemed to glitch. "Clara, what is this?" he stammered, but she continued as if he hadn't spoken. She nodded to the screen, and this is a Slack channel. In it, Julian is coaching Anya on how to falsify performance metrics for our flagship algorithm, promising her a director-level position and a significant equity grant in exchange for her silence. Every eye in the room darted toward Anya Sharma, the company's star coder. She was shaking, but her gaze was fixed on Julian. Her voice was quiet, but the microphone on the nearby table picked it up perfectly. "He said the baby was our true IPO. He said it was the start of a new dynasty. He said a lot of things that didn't align with the data. And 2 weeks ago, he said if I didn't back his play, he'd make sure my name was blacklisted from every tech incubator in Silicon Valley." Julian's face was the color of unpainted drywall. "Anya, what have you done?" Her chin rose. "I did what any good developer does, Julian. I saved my work." Clara gestured to the screen for the last time. The tension in the room was suffocating. "This is a cryptographically signed paternity analysis," she stated, "from a certified biotech lab." Anya consented to the procedure. "The results are stored on a public blockchain, making them immutable and completely verifiable." She tapped her tablet, and the report filled the screen, its conclusions stark and digital. Paternity analysis. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father. Probability of paternity, 0%. The silence that followed was not just an absence of noise, it was a vacuum. It was the sound of a unicorn startup imploding. Julian stared, his mouth opening and closing silently. It's a deep fake, a fabrication. She's trying to sink the company." Marcus stood up from his seat in the press area. His voice was calm, professional, and utterly lethal. "The financial data is pulled from your own version control history on GitHub. The Slack Conversations API logs are admissible in the state of California, and that lab's cryptographic signature on the blockchain is unbreakable. I would be more than happy to authenticate every single byte of this for a court, Mr. Vance. And given the evidence of investor fraud, I imagine the SEC will want to have a chat very soon." Elias Vance, his father, hauled himself to his feet, his face a mask of thunderous fury. His voice was a low growl. "Julian, what have you done?" Cornered and broken, Julian whirled on his father, his voice raw with a lifetime of resentment. "The same thing you did to get the patent for the processor that launched your entire career." The room went dead. Elias crumpled back into his chair as if his spine had been removed. His mother-in-law stared at him, a look of slow, dawning horror spreading across her face. 40 years of philanthropic donations and cover stories, and her daughter's husband had just dynamited the bedrock of it all. Dr. Eleanor Vance said nothing else. It wasn't her data to present. But the accusation landed with the force of a physical blow, and every board member in the room understood its meaning. Eleanor picked up her leather portfolio. She looked at Arthur one final time. "I didn't come here for your stock options," she said, her voice completely even. "I came here because you spent 10 years making me feel like one of your research assets. I just needed to stand in this room with everyone whose validation you crave and remind you that I was the lead scientist in my own life all along." She walked to the exit, leaving the corporate wreckage in her wake. Her brother, the cybersecurity analyst who had been quietly observing, rose and stood at her side. As they reached the glass doors, Eleanor looked back. She glanced at him, then at the assembled venture capitalists, then at the untouched bottles of mineral water, and said, "For what it's worth, the ethical AI initiative was always my vision. You never had that kind of foresight." Eleanor stepped out onto the balcony into the brisk Boston night. A cool wind was sweeping in from the harbor. Across the Seaport District, the city lights twinkled, a view she had always adored. She breathed in deeply, held it for a moment, and let it out in a slow, visible cloud. Her hands shook, and her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but a real smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was the smile of a scientist tasting a proven hypothesis for the very first time. The law offices of Chen and Associates in downtown Boston were a monument of steel and glass, a symbol of modern corporate power. This wasn't a research lab or a university gala. There was no soft lighting or polite applause, only the stark, impartial fluorescence of a Boston boardroom. Dr. Eleanor Vance sat with her counsel, a man named Mr. Chen. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, no smartwatch. Her hands formed a protective cup around the curve of her stomach, a gesture she'd found herself making unconsciously through every grant proposal, every data review, every single public moment where she needed to project a calm she hadn't felt in months. Across the mahogany table, Arthur Vance sat with his team. He looked smaller here, stripped of his custom-tailored suits and keynote speaker confidence. The effortless charisma that had built a biotech empire was gone, replaced by a generic gray suit and the stunned expression of a man watching his life's research go up in flames. The board meeting took 3 days, but each hour stretched into a lifetime. Eleanor's counsel was a quiet storm. He laid out the evidence with surgical precision, rebuilding the story one encrypted file at a time. The falsified data sets from a phantom research institute, the wire transfers to offshore accounts labeled lab equipment, the hidden server logs, the deed to the Cambridge condo, the secret research protocols. Every data point, every forged signature, every secret he thought was buried under layers of prestige. He brought a senior data analyst to the stand, a man who Arthur had tried to pressure into manipulating the results, who testified about the phantom clinical trials. He summoned a junior researcher from Arthur's firm, a young woman who had noticed the consistent and sizable payments to an unknown biomedical consultant and began documenting everything. Her files were the final thread, tying Arthur's personal ambition to a systematic conspiracy to defraud his own company's investors. Finally, he presented the sworn deposition of Chloe. Chloe walked to the stand carefully, one hand also resting on her pregnant belly. She kept her eyes fixed on the legal counsel, refusing to look at Arthur. After taking the oath, she told them everything. How they met at a biotech summit in Geneva. How he swore his marriage was a research partnership, a brand they had built together that was too valuable to dissolve. How he had enrolled her in a private trial funded by the slow-motion theft from another woman's work. How he had threatened to ruin her career when she found out the truth and tried to withdraw. She only broke once, when she described the moment she understood the brilliant scientist she loved didn't exist. He was a character he played, she said, her voice trembling, and my entire future was just another one of his experiments. The opposing counsel attempted to paint her as a disgruntled research subject, claiming she was testifying to secure a favorable payout. Chloe looked directly at him. I am testifying because my child deserves to grow up knowing that discovering the truth is difficult, but living with fabricated data is a price no one should have to pay. A heavy silence settled in the room. Mr. Chen's closing argument was under 20 minutes long. He used no dramatic gestures or loud pronouncements. He spoke with the steady assurance of someone who knew the facts were the only weapons he needed. Esteemed board members, he started, this is not a complicated story. This is about a man who built a partnership and then plotted its corruption, who sold innovation and then cashed it in, who took the woman he promised to build a legacy with and systematically drained her intellectual property, her credibility, and her future. He didn't do this in a moment of weakness, but through 18 months of deliberate, calculated fraud. The data is irrefutable. The financial records were undeniable, and the laws of New York State are not swayed by charisma. She paused. My client is not here for pity. She is here for what is contractually and morally hers. In this case, justice is simply the rebuilding of a life that was intentionally demolished. The judge, a woman named Eleanor Miller, who had presided over the New York County Supreme Court for 2 decades, and was notorious for her intolerance of financial fraud, delivered her judgment the next morning. The court finds the evidence of asset concealment and the fraudulent transfer of marital property to be both exhaustive and profoundly disturbing. The defendant engaged in a sophisticated scheme of deception involving shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, the misappropriation of partnership funds, and the systematic financial strangulation of his wife. Olivia's fingers were laced so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. Miss Davies, her attorney, placed a firm hand on her arm, a silent signal of victory. This court awards the full title of the Gramercy Park brownstone to Olivia Sterling. Further, upon the birth of her child, sole legal and physical custody will be granted to the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to pay child support consistent with state guidelines. 75% of all marital assets, including all funds recovered from the offshore accounts, are hereby awarded to the plaintiff. The defendant's illicit business practices will be referred to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Olivia registered the words, but they felt like they belonged to a different story, one about a shrewd woman who had executed a flawless plan, not one who had stumbled from one heartbreak to the next. Richard was escorted out by his legal team. He stopped at the courtroom door, his gaze locking with Olivia's. His face wasn't angry or resentful. It was a look of pure, hollowed-out shock, the expression of a man seeing his own reflection for the very first time and despising the stranger looking back. "I was building an empire," he said, his voice barely audible. "For us." Olivia met his stare, her own gaze steady. "That's the biggest lie, Richard. You weren't building. You were acquiring. And for a decade, I was just another one of your assets." He flinched, then turned and was gone. Olivia stayed in her seat as the room began to clear. Miss Davies started to pack her leather briefcase. Jessica, her sister, stood by the far wall, phone in her pocket, giving her space to breathe. "How are you, really?" Miss Davies asked softly. Olivia thought about it. She thought about the insurance rider for a painting she'd never seen, the offshore account statements, the wire transfers to a holding company, and the security logs from the secret penthouse that had shattered her world. "I feel like the game is over and the board is empty," she finally said, "and I have to invent a whole new one from scratch. I'm not sure which part of that is more terrifying." Miss Davies gave a knowing nod. "Take all the time you need. The best collections are curated with care." 6 months later, autumn had descended on New York, the kind of crisp, golden autumn that made the approaching winter seem like a fair trade. Burnt orange chrysanthemums overflowed from window boxes, the air smelled of roasted nuts from a street vendor, and the distant wail of a siren was a constant, familiar song. Olivia was on the rooftop deck of her brownstone, her asterisk brownstone. The words still felt new and fragile. The space he had dismissed as impractical was now a thriving urban garden of rosemary, sage, and the wild basil he had always hated the smell of. Leo was sleeping soundly in his carriage, soothed by the city breeze. Her sister Jessica was on the lounge chair with a craft beers, watching over them with the easy comfort of a person whose loyalty was absolute. She had spent the last month helping Olivia set up entirely new, encrypted financial and security systems. "This house," she'd declared, "needs a firewall without any back doors for a change." Things were not perfect. Olivia promised herself she would always be honest about that. She still had nightmares where the new locks on her doors wouldn't recognize her fingerprints, and she could hear Leo crying inside but couldn't get to him. She was meeting with a therapist, a sharp, insightful woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, whose office overlooked Bryant Park, and who never once implied she should be over it by now. Some weeks were a battle. Some mornings she would wake up and the first thought in her head would be one of Richard's casual criticisms veiled as a joke, and she would have to sit with her tea and remind herself that his narrative was no longer hers to carry. Her own judgment was. She was slowly, painstakingly learning to trust it again. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Her friend Isabella had started a small, informal group for women who had been financially betrayed by their powerful partners. She called it The Collection because, as she put it, The whole rising from the ashes metaphor was far too dramatic for her minimalist art gallery. They met on Tuesdays in Isabella's Soho gallery, a group of 6 now, and there was always strong coffee, occasionally some tears, and consistently a deep, healing laughter. Isabella had found a new calling. She was a fierce protector. Sophie had given birth in June to a baby boy. She and Olivia were not and would never be friends. There was no attempt to build a connection out of their shared wreckage, no cathartic lunches or late-night calls. 2 women caught in the same catastrophic storm had simply navigated to their own separate, quiet harbors. When Eleanor's baby was born, the other woman sent a single, unexpected gift, an antique silver locket with a note that read, "Thank you for reminding me what integrity looks like." Eleanor, in turn, made a donation in her name to a charity for whistleblowers in the medical field. Meredith Vance had finally left her husband in June. At 68, after 4 decades of determinedly looking the other way, she bought a spectacular brownstone in Beacon Hill and enrolled in the art history program at Boston University she had secretly coveted since college. "It's the first time in my entire life I've chosen the painting for my own wall," she confided in Eleanor over coffee in Eleanor's sun-drenched lab. Eleanor never once brought up the betrayal. She knew Meredith was aware, in that intuitive way mothers have, and it wasn't Eleanor's cross to bear. Meredith was curating a new life for herself, and that was all that mattered. Harrison Vance had disappeared from the biotech investment world in a storm of whispered rumors. The official story claimed he was on an extended health-related sabbatical. The truth, however, was a far more scandalous tale, one traded in hushed tones over cocktails at the city's most exclusive social clubs. He and Meredith had not exchanged a single word since the afternoon she had her things moved out. And Arthur? Arthur was under house arrest in his waterfront condo, awaiting trial for research fraud and violating federal ethics laws. His influence had vanished overnight. His professional reputation was a pile of ash. His name was now a grim warning on industry forums, but Eleanor found herself thinking of him less and less. Each day that his name didn't cross her mind felt like a small triumph, like she was reclaiming sovereign territory in her own head. On a crisp autumn evening, Eleanor stood on the small terrace of her new research lab after her son Liam was sound asleep. The city lights sparkled across the Charles River, a steady, reassuring pulse. The lab was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that felt like profound peace, not a hollow absence. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her colleague, Chloe. "Mandatory celebration tomorrow, my place. We're raising a glass to new grants, and I have several bottles of ridiculously expensive Prosecco." Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that began deep in her chest and bloomed into a quiet laugh of pure relief. A laugh of freedom, of knowing she had finally reached the other side. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so weightless. Perhaps it was a few weeks prior when her friend David was helping her assemble a new spectrometer, and they descended into a silly argument over the instructions, making young Liam shriek with laughter at their antics. He guarded her newfound peace as if it were his own, and maybe that was the foundation of a real new beginning. You could never reclaim the years you'd lost or have your trust perfectly restored, but you could gather new moments, smaller moments, but infinitely more substantial. A son's first successful coding project, a loyal friend who appears with data recovery software and pizza when your life is burning down, and who then stays to help you sift through the ashes. A few nights earlier, Eleanor had been sorting through old cloud backups. She came across a photo of the 3 of them, Arthur, her son Liam, and herself, at a medical awards dinner celebrating their lab's latest breakthrough, all of them beaming for the press. Liam had pointed to the screen and asked the question Eleanor had been dreading and rehearsing for. "Did we used to be a happy family, Mom?" Eleanor held the device, seeing the scene with untainted eyes for the first time. She saw her own smile, which she now saw was strained. She saw Liam's bright, innocent face, and she saw Arthur's hand on her shoulder, a gesture she now recognized not as affection, but as an assertion of ownership over her work. "We were happy, my love," she said softly. Every one of those moments was a piece of data, but sometimes being a great scientist is about recognizing when your theory is flawed and it's time to design a new experiment, and that is precisely what we are going to do. Liam accepted this with the simple logic of a child and went back to building a rover out of spare parts, a machine that was brilliantly flawed and entirely his own. Now, Eleanor stood in her lab, looking out at the Boston skyline. She thought about the woman she had been just 18 months ago, the one who saw Arthur's name published in a prestigious medical journal and felt only a wave of shared pride. She thought of the woman who, days later, pursued a tiny, nagging anomaly in the trial results and uncovered a series of unauthorized clinical studies, a discovery that led her to an encrypted drive and a trail of payments to a specialized genetics clinic. She thought of the woman who felt her world shatter at a biotech conference after seeing that clinic's chief researcher wearing a prototype of Arthur's new diagnostic tool, a tool built on Eleanor's stolen research. She wished she could go back and speak to that version of herself. Not to warn her, the pain was an essential catalyst. She wanted to tell her that the most crushing discovery of her career would not be the end of her career, that the frantic silence she once mistook for peace would eventually transform into a deep and lasting calm, that her unborn baby would be remarkable, that she would be remarkable, that the tiny data anomaly she had followed for months, that single thread she pulled, would unravel an entire tapestry of lies and ultimately purchase her freedom. If you're listening to this and any part of Eleanor's story sounds familiar, if you have ever been gaslit into questioning your own competence by the one person who promised to champion you, I need you to hear this. You are not losing your grip. Your intellect is your most powerful weapon, and you are not walking this road by yourself. The journey doesn't begin with leaving. It begins with believing you are worthy of better, because you are. You always have been. Eleanor set her laptop on the cool metal of her high-rise balcony railing. She was 7 months pregnant with her new life, and as she drew her knees to her chest, she watched the sunset wash over Boston, switching on a network of city lights that felt like they were shining just for her. Tomorrow, she had a grant review meeting for a new project, her son Liam's science fair at 10, and a routine ultrasound in the afternoon. Tomorrow was breathtakingly, beautifully normal, and she now knew that normal was the most extraordinary thing in the world when you had to fight your way back to it. She stood up, stretched her aching back, and went inside, sliding the deadbolt on her front door. It was her front door. She peeked into Liam's room, smiling at the sound of his quiet, steady breathing. He was safe. He was where he belonged. She then slid into her own bed, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, sleep was not an escape, but a welcome solace, bringing dreams that were exclusively her own. This story was carefully researched, written, and produced by our team to explore a resonant experience with authentic emotional honesty. Each character, every setting, and every single word was selected with one purpose in mind: to offer strength, validation, and hope to anyone who has ever had their truth denied. We thank you for watching, we thank you for listening, and we thank you for being part of a community that believes our stories have the power to reshape our world.